The grand ballroom of an Atlanta hotel shimmered with cold light as crystal chandeliers scattered icy reflections across champagne flutes. The music halted when the doors slammed open. Emily Carter stepped in, clutching an old calculator, three little girls in white dresses trailing behind her. Darius, the groom, froze. Guests whispered, "Isn't that his ex-wife? But 3 children?" Emily's calm smile cut through the tension as she spoke, voice steady, sharp. "Funny thing about numbers, Darius. You can lie to people, but numbers always tell the truth." The entire room turned still, as if time itself had stopped breathing. The ballroom stayed frozen in silence, the weight of Emily's words settling like frost across every polished glass and gold-plated fork. The guests shifted uneasily, their whispers cut short by the steel edge in her tone. Yet for Emily, the chandeliers above dissolved into haze, pulling her back in time, back to the days before the gowns, before the betrayal, before she understood just how far numbers could carry or destroy a life. She was 23 then, sitting at a wobbly kitchen table in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled of reheated soup and detergent. The wallpaper peeled in places, but the little lamp on the table cast enough light for her pen to race across paper. Her mother had given her the calculator years ago, scratched and yellowed, the kind of relic people laughed at in the smartphone age. But Emily loved the click of the buttons, the way it grounded her. Night after night, she pressed its keys while the city outside pulsed with noise. She didn't go to bars. She didn't waste tips from the diner on fleeting distractions. Every shift's earnings were logged, every cent was tracked, every projection written out in neat columns. On those nights, her younger brother would sometimes stumble in from basketball practice, collapsing on the couch and teasing her. "Who studies numbers after a double shift? You're crazy." She'd smile faintly but never lift her head. She wasn't studying. She was building. Compound interest, budgeting, the quiet weapons nobody noticed until it was too late. Her mother, frail from years of illness but sharp as ever, had leaned against the doorway one evening and said words that stuck like scripture. "Discipline beats luck, Emily. Remember that. One day, hard work will prove them wrong." Emily nodded, not knowing exactly who they were yet, but she believed. Then Darius appeared. He swept into her world with a grin that promised shortcuts and a charm that pulled at the threads of her lonely resolve. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and made people lean closer, who joked with waiters and tipped just enough to seem generous. His shoes shined even on rainy days. His laughter was polished, his confidence intoxicating. And for a girl who had lived her life behind the safety of numbers, he was chaos she thought she needed. Their first dates blurred into promises. He teased her for carrying the calculator in her purse. "What, you gonna do equations at dinner?" He laughed. She blushed, embarrassed, but he kissed her hand as if to erase the sting. She mistook the mockery for affection. Marriage came quickly, a courthouse wedding, a simple ring, a dream stitched together from his ambition and her savings. For a while she believed, she wanted to. Yet shadows crept in. His family, elegant, opinionated, always watching, made sure their whispers reached her. "She can't even give him children. What good is she? She'll drag him down." Emily forced herself to smile at dinners, nodding politely, folding her hands in her lap while the humiliation burned like acid in her chest. Still, she worked. Nights at the diner, mornings cleaning office buildings, afternoons balancing bills. She built a savings box under the bed, never touching it, never telling anyone how much it grew. Numbers didn't lie. They gave her certainty when everything else shook. By the time she counted $12,000, her hands trembled. It was her proof that she was more than the whispers, more than the failure they branded her. But Darius found it. She came home one evening to find him sitting on the bed, the tin box open beside him. The bills lay scattered like fallen leaves, his hands sliding through them with wonder. His eyes shone with excitement, not gratitude. This is our chance, Emily. This is capital. I can build something real. Our future." Her breath caught. That money was her armor, her safety net, her discipline made flesh. But his words echoed with the American dream she had been raised on. Build, invest, rise. He held her hands, warm and certain, promising, "This is for us. Success for us. You'll see." She wanted to believe. For once, she wanted to be more than the disciplined girl with a calculator and a tired face. She wanted to trust love. Against every instinct, she nodded. She let him take it. The months after blurred into unease. At first, he came home with stories of meetings, opportunities, ideas that sounded like castles in the sky. She listened, hopeful, clapping when he spoke of potential contracts, new offices, future employees. But numbers tell the truth. The bills piled higher, the food grew scarcer, and the dreams he painted never materialized into paper or coin. Emily swallowed her doubts, reminding herself of her mother's words: discipline, mindset, patience. Perhaps love required the same endurance numbers demanded. Perhaps she needed to give him time. Yet deep inside, fear grew. She clutched her calculator in secret moments, pressing the buttons just to hear the familiar click, as if the sound alone could anchor her to reality. One night, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling while Darius slept soundly beside her. Her chest ached with doubt. Was she building a life, or burying her discipline in someone else's dream? The debate gnawed at her: to trust love or to trust numbers, to protect herself or surrender everything to him. The decision twisted her insides until dawn lightened the room. In the end, she silenced the voice of caution. She chose love. But love would not save her. It would betray her, leave her standing years later in that glittering ballroom with 3 little girls by her side and an old calculator in her hand, ready to prove, once and for all, that numbers never lie. The chandelier's frozen light faded from Emily's mind as she remembered the days that followed Darius's promises. He had left their small apartment one morning with her $12,000 in a leather satchel, kissing her cheek like a man on his way to battle. For weeks he returned with stories of partners, opportunities, and investors who saw his brilliance. He spoke in grand phrases like a politician rehearsing for a crowd. She tried to believe, but beneath the surface a thin crack widened. Each time she asked for details, he brushed her aside with a smile and a line about trust. Trust was a luxury Emily could no longer afford. The fridge was empty, her shoes wore thin, and her mother's health declined rapidly. Nights were filled with the sound of her mother's coughing from the next room, and the expense of medicine drained what little Emily made at the diner. Still, she went on, carrying trays with a stiff smile, hiding her worries behind polite nods to customers who never noticed the exhaustion in her eyes. Then came the morning when Darius did not return at all. The bed stayed cold, the leather satchel was gone, and so was every trace of the money. Hours passed, then days, then whispers began. Someone had seen him with a woman named Sabrina, a banker's daughter with a wardrobe of designer dresses and an easy laugh. Emily walked through the streets of Atlanta with her heart splintering, the sound of those whispers following like a cruel echo. When the truth settled, it felt heavier than betrayal. He had not only taken her savings, but also her trust in herself. She carried the shame back to her mother's apartment, staring at the calculator on the table as if it had scolded her. Numbers never lied, yet she had ignored them. The weeks that followed were a blur of survival. Emily took on more shifts, cared for her mother, and tried to ignore the ache in her chest. The American dream she had once built out of careful discipline seemed shattered. Yet the discipline remained. She woke early, planned every hour, and refused to collapse under the weight pressing against her. That was when she met Daniel Reed. He was nothing like Darius. He entered quietly, a young founder who had built a small startup out of a rented office downtown. Emily encountered him by chance at a community event for small businesses, where she had volunteered to help set up tables. He noticed the old calculator she carried in her bag, the same one her mother had given her. Instead of mocking, he leaned closer, curious. "That's not just old," he said with a smile that was not cruel but steady. "It's proof of discipline. Most people spend, you save. Most waste time, you count it." His words struck her like a match against stone, sparking something she thought had died. Daniel believed in blending health with finance, nourishment with literacy. He told her about an idea, an app that would encourage families to budget meals as carefully as being able to money, linking wellness with financial growth. Emily listened, hesitant, but as he spoke, the logic appealed to her own instinct. For the first time in months, her calculator felt like more than a relic. She joined his small circle of dreamers, not because she trusted easily again, but because she wanted to rebuild. They called the project Nourish Plus Finance. Days turned into nights of brainstorming, nights turned into mornings filled with notes, graphs, and sketches. Emily poured herself into it, using her experience balancing meager budgets to design tools that spoke to ordinary people. She knew the weight of a dollar, the importance of stretching a meal, the power of small choices compounding over time. The early months were fragile. They worked out of coffee shops, sharing laptops, borrowing Wi-Fi. Emily shouldered the work silently, building frameworks, while Daniel secured small investments. It was not glamorous, but it was honest. And for the first time, she felt her discipline transforming into something visible. Slowly, progress came. They launched a beta version, promoted it in community centers, and taught single mothers how to track both meals and expenses. One woman hugged Emily after a workshop, tears in her eyes. "For the first time, I feel like I can breathe," she whispered. Emily carried that memory with her like armor. Success arrived not in headlines, but in steady growth. A few hundred users turned into thousands. Reviews praised the simplicity, the humanity. Emily felt her self-worth returning, brick by brick. She had not failed. She had simply given her discipline to the wrong hands. Now, she reclaimed it. But shadows never linger far. Online, she saw Darius's face again. He appeared in photos with Sabrina, boasting about his new ventures, flaunting luxury suits and expensive dinners. He mocked openly, posting a message that spread quickly. Some people are born to win, others to count pennies. Guess who's who? The words burned, not because they were true, but because they were meant for her. Then came the invitation, a cream-colored envelope addressed in neat calligraphy, an invitation to Darius and Sabrina's wedding. Inside, a note written by him, sharp with cruelty. "You should see what real success looks like." The humiliation wrapped itself around her throat like a vice. He intended to display her failure in front of the very people who once whispered about her. At the same time, life grew harsher. Her mother's illness worsened, treatments drained her spirit, and the startup's funding thinned dangerously. Investors pressed for results, users demanded improvements, and Daniel, though supportive, grew tense with the strain. Emily found herself working late into the night, calculator under her hand, eyes burning as she calculated ways to stretch every dollar. One evening, when exhaustion finally cracked her composure, she clutched the calculator and wept quietly in the small office. For a moment, she believed the whispers, that she was barren, broken, destined to fail. Her tears fell onto the scratched plastic keys, the sound of her sobs filling the room until a voice interrupted. It was Daniel. He leaned against the doorway, his expression firm but gentle. Discipline, mindset, success. That's your legacy, Emily. Don't let him define your worth. You've already proven more than he ever will. His words settled into her chest, not as comfort, but as a command. She wiped her tears and nodded. The next morning she made her decision. She would not hide from Darius, nor allow him to humiliate her on his stage. If he wanted her presence, he would have it, but not as the girl he abandoned. She would stand as a woman who carried truth in her hand, a woman who had built again from ashes, a woman who would not be silenced by his arrogance. The date of the wedding loomed like a storm on the horizon. Emily prepared quietly, carrying not designer dresses but something far more powerful. The discipline her mother had planted, the calculator that had never lied, and the children who carried her name forward. The numbers had always told the truth. Soon, so would she. The day of the wedding arrived with skies so clear it almost felt like the universe was mocking her. Emily woke before dawn, her body tense, her mind sharper than it had been in years. The three little girls stirred beside her, their matching dresses laid out on a chair, crisp white with ribbons tied neatly at the waist. They were not accessories, not tools for spectacle. They were truth embodied. The truth Darius had denied, the truth the world had whispered she would never hold. She brushed their hair gently, fastening braids with steady hands, whispering to each of them that today was not about shame, but about light. By the time the limousine rolled up to the Grand Hotel, guests had already gathered in clusters near the glass doors, men adjusting ties, women smoothing gowns, chatter floating across the marble like drifting smoke. Sabrina's family had spared no expense. The event gleamed with wealth and status, the kind of scene designed to impress investors and crush doubters. Emily stepped out quietly, holding the calculator in one hand, the girl's small fingers curled into her other. A hush spread, the kind that ripples outward until the entire crowd turns in unison. Inside, chandeliers spilled golden light across rows of chairs draped in ivory. The air buzzed with anticipation and carefully disguised judgment. Darius stood near the altar, his tuxedo cut perfectly, his jaw set in arrogant confidence. For a brief second, his face faltered when he saw her, but arrogance returned quickly, painted over like lacquer. He wanted her there. She could see it in his eyes. This was his theater, his stage. He expected her to shrink, to break, to prove him right in front of the world. Instead, she walked forward slowly, each step measured like a metronome. The three little girls followed, their shoes tapping lightly against the floor, ribbons swaying with each movement. Murmurs exploded among the guests. Some gasped, some whispered furiously, others stared wide-eyed. Emily's calm smile never wavered. When the ceremony paused in confusion, she reached the center aisle. The officiant cleared his throat, attempting to restore order, but Emily's voice rose above him, steady and commanding. "Funny thing about numbers, Darius," she said again, her tone echoing with even greater resonance. "They never lie, and today it's time for the truth." Gasps rippled. Sabrina's head jerked toward Darius, her manicured hand tightening around the bouquet. Darius raised his chin, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. "This is pathetic. She's desperate for attention. We all know she was never able to give me a family, never able to support me." He spread his hands toward the guests as if appealing to their sympathy. "She clings to an old calculator like it makes her special." Emily held the calculator higher, the scratched keys catching the chandelier's reflection. $1,000 you promised would be our future. I gave you discipline, and you gave me betrayal. But numbers don't forget, even when liars rewrite the story. From her purse, she pulled a folded paper, yellowed at the edges. She pressed a button on her phone, and a recording played through the speakers she had arranged with a sympathetic hotel technician. The sound of Darius's voice filled the room, younger but unmistakable. "This is our future, Emily. This money is for us. I'll build success for us." The crowd stirred violently. Sabrina's face drained of color. Darius lunged forward, reaching as if to snatch the phone. But Emily stepped back, her daughters holding her skirts firmly. Her voice cut through the chaos. "You told the world I was barren, that I was worthless, but the truth is here." She gestured to the three girls, now staring boldly at the man they had never called father. "You are the one who could never give life. I was never broken. You were." From her bag, she revealed medical papers, crisp and official. She lifted them high. "I was tested. I was healthy. The truth is, you were infertile all along. You let me carry your shame so you could play the hero. But numbers do not lie, and neither do diagnoses." The ballroom erupted. Sabrina staggered back, eyes wide with horror. The guests' whispers turned sharp, condemning. Darius's mask cracked. His hands trembled, his voice breaking into incoherent protests. Lies! All of it! Fabricated! But his words drowned under the weight of murmurs now spoken openly, condemning, mocking, disgusted. Emily raised the calculator once more, holding it like a relic. This never lied to me. Every cent, every choice, every truth was etched here. You can build castles of arrogance, but numbers tear them down. I believed in you once, and I paid dearly. But I will not be defined by your failures. Today, you answer to truth. Daniel stepped forward from the back of the crowd. He had come quietly, dressed modestly, unnoticed until now. His presence radiated steady strength, not the blinding arrogance of Darius, but the quiet leadership of a man who built rather than consumed. He placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, not to lead her, but to stand beside her. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. Sabrina's bouquet fell from her hand, petals scattering across the marble floor. Her voice cracked as she turned to Darius. You lied to me? You lied to everyone. She ripped off her veil, the delicate fabric tearing as she flung it aside. Then she turned and walked out, her heels clattering like gunfire against the polished floor. The officiant, uncertain, lowered his book. The guests no longer tried to hide their disdain. Hollow, trembling. Emily stepped closer, her daughters still at her side, her voice quieter now, but heavy with finality. Numbers never lie, Darius, and neither did I. You lied to yourself, and you lied to everyone else. That is why today you stand exposed. She turned her back on him, walking steadily toward the doors where sunlight streamed through stained glass. Each guest shifted aside, parting like water before her. Heads bowed not in judgment now, but in reverence. Some clapped softly, others whispered words of respect. She walked past them without pride, only clarity. The girls' small voices chimed with laughter as they skipped to keep up with her stride, their innocence cutting through the heaviness of the moment. At the doors, she paused, lifting the calculator once more. Its weight was not heavy, but liberating. In that moment, she was not the abandoned wife, not the woman mocked for barrenness, not the failure defined by someone else's story. She was the proof of discipline, the embodiment of mindset, the quiet champion of truth. Behind her, the ballroom boiled with chaos. Darius's shouts faded into nothing as Emily stepped into the light. Daniel walked beside her, his presence grounding her, his quiet smile reflecting belief not in spectacle but in her. The girls tugged at her hands, giggling, their dresses glowing in the sun. The numbers had told their story, and at last the world had listened. The ballroom faded behind her, but the echoes of murmurs trailed like a storm she had left in ruins. Outside, the August heat pressed down on the glass walls of the hotel, yet Emily felt only the cool release of truth. Daniel's steps matched hers, silent, steady, his presence more anchor than shield. The girls clung to her hands, twirling in their dresses, blissfully unaware of the firestorm unraveling behind the gilded doors. For the first time in years, Emily did not carry shame. She carried clarity. But consequences never move slowly. By the time she reached the curb, journalists and curious bystanders were already converging. Whispers of scandal traveled faster than cars on the Atlanta highway. Phones filmed her as she stepped into the light, camera flashes catching the calculator in her hand like a crown. She did not speak. She didn't need to. The silence of her calm composure was a sharper weapon than any soundbite. Inside, chaos swelled. Investors excused themselves from the reception, muttering about risk management. Sabrina's family demanded answers from Darius, their money tied to his lies. By nightfall, news outlets reported the dramatic confrontation, headlines flashing across television screens. Entrepreneur exposed at own wedding. Social media replayed the recording she had played in the ballroom, Darius's words about building a future with her echoing on every feed. His empire of charm collapsed under the weight of proof. Emily, meanwhile, did not celebrate. She returned home quietly, putting her daughters to bed, their laughter fading into soft breathing as the apartment settled into night. She sat at the kitchen table, calculator before her, the same as she had years earlier. Only now the numbers before her were not just bills and debts, but possibilities. She thought of Nourish Finance, the app she and Daniel had struggled to keep alive, the project that had nearly drowned under lack of funding. The scandal that crushed Darius had done something strange. It cast light on her instead. People who once mocked her were now asking questions, offering interviews, calling her a symbol of resilience. Daniel arrived with takeout cartons, setting them on the table as if the day had been ordinary. "You realize," he said softly, "the world just saw you prove everything we've been saying. Discipline isn't a slogan, it's a weapon." She looked up at him, exhausted but resolute. "Weapons need direction," she answered. "I don't want to spend my life proving him wrong. I want to build something that proves people like us can win." The following weeks tested her resolve. Calls poured in, some supportive, others exploitative. A talk show host invited her to speak, while a business magazine asked to feature her as a case study. She declined most, wary of becoming spectacle. But she accepted one opportunity. Parents, college students buried in debt, and shared her story not as gossip but as a lesson. She spoke of budgeting, of compounding small choices, of refusing to let shame define worth. The audience rose in applause not because she humiliated a man, but because she transformed humiliation into clarity. Meanwhile, Darius's downfall accelerated. Clients withdrew contracts, banks rescinded loans, Sabrina filed for annulment. His arrogance, once a shield, became a joke whispered in boardrooms. Photos of him leaving court hearings with sunglasses and hunched shoulders filled tabloids. The man who had declared himself untouchable was reduced to fragments. Justice, Emily realized, was not in his humiliation but in her freedom, yet revelation reached deeper than revenge. She discovered records buried in court documents. Darius had used her savings not for investment but for reckless speculation. He had gambled on ventures far beyond his knowledge, borrowing under false pretenses, signing contracts with hidden debts. Some of the businesses had collapsed, leaving employees unpaid and families ruined. Emily felt the weight of it like a stone in her chest. She was not the only one he had betrayed. So she made a decision. She worked with Daniel to establish a foundation under Nourish Plus Finance, dedicating a percentage of profits to those harmed by predatory contracts and broken promises. She met with families in church basements, explaining financial basics with patience, handing out simple booklets, showing them how to use the app. She returned to the very diner where she once wiped counters and offered free workshops to waitresses who juggled bills between shifts. They listened, eyes wide, realizing for the first time that discipline was not a punishment, but a form of freedom. One night after such a session, she walked past the neon sign flickering against the Atlanta humidity. She paused, calculator in hand, staring at its scratched surface. Her mother's words returned like a hymn. "Discipline beats luck. One day, hard work will prove them wrong." Tears welled, but this time they were not born of despair. They were gratitude for the lesson, for the legacy, for the unshakable truth that had carried her through humiliation into clarity. The city began to notice. Local papers highlighted her work. Parents sent messages thanking her for showing their children a different path. Investors who once overlooked her now asked to fund her company, impressed not by glamour, but by the authenticity of her story. Daniel urged caution, reminding her that sudden attention often fades, but Emily had already learned not to chase approval. She chose partners carefully, refusing offers that demanded she sacrifice integrity for growth. The revelation spread further than she expected. At a town hall, a teenage girl stood up and told Emily she had seen the wedding clip online. "Everyone laughed at him," the girl said, voice trembling, "but I watched you hold your two." ground, and now I think maybe I can hold mine too. The words pierced Emily more deeply than applause ever could. She realized then that the story had stopped being about Darius long ago. It was about every person who had been dismissed, mocked, underestimated, and silenced. Justice was not a gavel in a courtroom. It was a ripple that spread outward when truth was spoken without fear. And revelation was not just about exposing lies, it was about reclaiming the power to define one's own worth. Emily stood late one night on her balcony, the city glowing below her, Daniel beside her. He asked quietly, "Do you regret it? Walking into that ballroom?" She shook her head, gripping the calculator tightly. "For years I thought my discipline made me small. Tonight I know it made me infinite." He smiled, the kind of smile that held no judgment, only belief. Together they stood in silence, the hum of Atlanta rising around them, a city that had witnessed her fall and now her rise. The past no longer bound her, the whispers no longer caged her. She had walked into fire and walked out holding light. The justice of truth had revealed not only who Darius was, but who she had always been. And with every calculation, every choice, every breath of discipline, she was rewriting the story of what it meant to succeed. The city never forgot the ballroom scene. For weeks, headlines carried her name, but soon the frenzy dulled, as all scandals do. What remained was not spectacle, but the slow, steady shaping of something larger. Emily found herself no longer fighting for survival, but being asked for guidance. Parents requested she visit schools, community leaders invited her to speak, and young professionals sought her advice on balancing ambition with self-respect. She accepted not to bask in attention, but to plant seeds she wished someone had planted for her when she was young and frightened. The girls grew accustomed to evenings filled with meetings and conferences, often sitting quietly in corners of offices, while their mother spoke to strangers about compound interest and budgeting. Sometimes they fidgeted, sometimes they drew pictures on scraps of paper, but they watched her with wide eyes, absorbing her calm authority. Emily felt their gaze like sunlight on her back, a constant reminder that every word was shaping not just strangers, but her daughter's vision of what strength looked like. Nourish and Finance expanded beyond the fragile beta project it once was. With cautious but determined steps, Emily and Daniel recruited a team that valued integrity over profit. They built workshops that paired financial planning with nutrition, teaching families how to stretch groceries and savings with equal discipline. Instead of boardrooms filled with marble and glass, their classrooms were church basements, community centers, and school gyms. Parents carried notebooks filled with numbers. Teenagers tapped notes into phones, and little children colored quietly while hearing their parents discuss budgeting for the first time in their lives. One afternoon, a woman approached Emily after a workshop in a small Atlanta neighborhood. Her eyes were tired, but alive with new hope. "For years I thought I was failing," she confessed. "I thought poverty was a stain that couldn't be scrubbed away. But today I realized it's not failure, it's math. And math can change if I change the inputs." Emily hugged her gently, recognizing the weight in her voice. She carried that moment home and wrote it on a sticky note above her desk. Poverty is not failure, it is math. The national press returned, this time not for scandal, but for inspiration. A feature in a financial magazine called her the quiet architect of the American dream, a woman who rebuilt herself by applying the same principles she taught others. She refused to be romanticized. In interviews, she repeated the same truth. There was no magic, only discipline, mindset, and relentless patience. People wanted drama, but she gave them clarity. Her refusal to become spectacle became its own legend. Darius disappeared from the front pages, swallowed by lawsuits and debts. Emily no longer followed his descent. To do so would have chained her to the past, and she had chosen to live forward. Sometimes his name surfaced articles about fraud or failed ventures, but it no longer pierced her. He had become irrelevant. Her fight was no longer against him, but for those who still lived where she once had, counting pennies in the dark and wondering if their worth would ever be recognized. Daniel stood by her side through each step, not as savior, but as partner. Together, they crafted a vision that reached beyond Atlanta. They traveled to other cities, meeting local leaders, adapting Nourish Plus Finance to cultural needs, translating materials into multiple languages. In Detroit, they sat with auto workers' families who faced layoffs. In Houston, they guided single mothers rebuilding after storms destroyed homes. In New York, they spoke to students drowning in loans. Everywhere, the message remained the same. Discipline is not punishment, it is freedom. The girls, growing fast, began to see themselves as part of this mission. At one event, the eldest spoke into a microphone, her small voice trembling but determined. "My mom taught me numbers don't lie, and they say we can do anything if we work hard." The audience erupted into applause, not because of polished delivery, but because the child's honesty rang truer than any motivational speech. Emily stood behind her, tears pricking her eyes, the calculator resting in her palm like an heirloom being passed to the next generation. Society shifted in quiet ways. Banks invited Emily to consult on programs for underserved communities. Schools adopted her workshops as part of their curriculum. Even government officials requested her insight, curious about how financial literacy could reduce dependence on aid. She moved carefully, refusing to let politics dilute her mission. Her loyalty remained with ordinary people, the waitresses, janitors, teachers, and parents who lived paycheck to paycheck. One evening, she returned to the very hotel where the confrontation had occurred. This time, the ballroom was filled with entrepreneurs, educators, and journalists gathered not for a wedding, but for a summit on financial literacy. As she walked onto the stage, the chandeliers glittered as before, but the silence that fell was not one of scandal. It was respect. She began not with her story, but with her mother's words. "Discipline beats luck." The audience leaned forward, some scribbling notes, others simply absorbing the gravity of her calm delivery. When she finished, the applause thundered, yet she did not smile with triumph. Instead, she looked at the three girls in the front row, their eyes shining, and she raised the calculator high. It was scratched, outdated, absurd in a world of smartphones and apps. Yet it symbolized everything. The crowd rose to their feet, not just for her, but for the idea that the smallest tools, when guided by discipline, could rebuild lives. Later that night, as the summit quieted and the ballroom emptied, she stood alone by the window, watching Atlanta's skyline pulse with light. Daniel approached, wrapping a jacket around her shoulders. "You've changed more than your own life," he said softly. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the city's glow. "I didn't change it alone. My mother planted it, my children carry it, and every person who listens carries it forward." The future stretched wide before her, not as a glittering promise, but as a ledger waiting to be filled, line by line. She no longer feared mistakes, because she understood numbers never lied. And if numbers were truth, then every disciplined step she took would write a legacy far greater than any scandal could erase. In the years to come, her story would be retold in classrooms, boardrooms, and family kitchens. People would recall the woman who walked into a ballroom with 3 children and an old calculator and turned humiliation into revelation. They would say she embodied the American dream, not because she was handed success, but because she built it with patience, grit, and relentless clarity. That night, as she tucked her daughters into bed, the youngest asked softly, "Mom, will we always have the calculator?" Emily smiled, kissing her forehead. "As long as we need it. And one day, you'll have something of your own that reminds you, numbers don't lie." The child clutched her blanket, eyes closing with peace. Emily stepped into the hallway, lights dimmed, her heart full. She knew the world would continue to test her, to tempt her, to challenge her discipline. But she also knew she was no longer alone in carrying it. A movement had begun, born from humiliation, but thriving in hope. And as she placed the calculator back on the kitchen table, beneath the quiet hum of the refrigerator, it glinted under the faint lamp. It was no longer just a tool. It was a symbol of everything she had become, everything she had given, and everything yet to be built. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. More stories are on the way.